Hi everyone. Welcome to the Leadership in Action series, where we delve into the leadership journeys of leaders from different fields. Today, we have an extraordinary leader with us, the 28th Army Chief of the Indian Army, General Manoj Naravane. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
It is my honor to meet you, and I am deeply grateful to you for doing this interview in person. Viewers, we will start with the defense and strategic questions, followed by leadership, and then a few touching upon his personal life. So, it is proverbially said that you can choose your friends but not your neighbors. Given India's history of a deep civilizational conflict with Pakistan on one hand and a belligerent communist regime on the other, in addition to their cooperation in containing India's influence, a two-front war seems like a likely possibility in the future. Having been at the helm of the Indian Army, what are your views on India's readiness levels to deal with a two-front war in terms of economic and military capabilities?
Well, firstly, thank you, Anaga, for having me on this program of yours. And it is always a pleasure to be able to talk and send the message across to the larger population on aspects of military and the security. It's a subject which many people are quite unaware of, and it is a good thing that such programs are being done to raise the overall level of awareness in the country about security issues. Coming on to the particular question that you have asked, we have, of course, two belligerent neighbors to our west and northeast in Pakistan and China. So, definitely, there are multiple threats that we face on account of this. But what is important is to be able to distinguish between a two front or multiple front threats and fighting two front wars. And this is a point I make quite often because these terms are used very interchangeably without understanding the ramifications. So, obviously, when you have multiple threats, or to keep it simple, two front threat, one with on the west with Pakistan, one to the north with China, the capabilities that require to be developed to cater and deal with these two threats would be different. And to that end, we are always in the process of analyzing what these threats could be, how would they manifest, and what all needs to be done to be able to deal with them.
Right.
But fighting a two-front war as against preparing for a two-front threat is a different ball game altogether. And fighting on two fronts is never a good idea. And history is replete with examples where when countries tried to fight on two fronts, they were had to suffer defeat. And the most obvious and glaring example of that is Germany in World War II. They opened a front to their west in France and against England. But then halfway through that, before they could completely subdue that threat, they opened the front to their east against Russia. So they on their own started fighting on two fronts. And when that happened, against the combined might of two enemies, then one person will always suffer. And I give this example of a boxer in a ring. If there is one boxer in a boxing ring against two opponents, then you can well imagine what the result is going to be, no matter how strong that single person is. So, therefore, while we will cater to deal with multiple threats, our endeavor should always be to tackle one front at one time. And that would be done through a variety of means, which I will expound upon later.
Right. So, I mean, as you said, it's never a good idea to go with a two-front war at any time.
Yeah. That's the bottom line.
Yes. The Russian offensive in Ukraine has shattered a very common belief in military fraternity that wars of the future will be short lived, decisive, and intense. In fact, the conflict has dragged on for more than 2 years now, and there are no signs of a ceasefire. On the contrary, the resilience of Russia's military and economic capabilities against the combined might of the West has surprised many. So, on this backdrop, what kind of lessons in terms of new age warfare and technology can the Indian armed forces draw upon?
Well, the Russia-Ukraine war is now already in its third year, and it started in February of 2021. And many lessons will be learnt from the war at various levels: tactical level, operational level, strategic level. But the first and foremost lesson is that wars will always be there. And after a prolonged period of peace, there is that tendency which comes into a country, into the psyche of the people, that wars are passé, and people realize that wars lead to death and destruction, etc., etc., and therefore, why prepare for war? So the first, actually, the and foremost lesson is that wars are always around the corner, because you might want peace, but you can't tell your opponent what to do or what not to do, and therefore you have to be prepared for the worst case scenario. And that is, I think, the first and foremost lesson, that if you want peace, prepare for war. And this is a saying made in the 5th century by a Roman scholar. And I think what he said in the 5th century is still applicable today. Nothing has changed in thousands of years. Then, of course, not just from the Russian side, from the Ukrainian side also, if a big country thinks they'll win an easy victory over a small country, then the resilience of that smaller country is also something we have to consider. That it is not always a walkover. There are many factors which come into play: the moral versus the material, the morale versus only the numbers. And in this case, I think Ukraine has shown great resilience in being able to hold its own against a much bigger country and a much bigger enemy. And we can draw parallels in that between various countries in our neighborhood. Who is the bigger one, who is the smaller one, and what are the likely outcomes. But it is equally correct, as you mentioned in your statement, that Russia also has been able to hold out against the collective might of the West. And in spite of all the aid which has been pouring into Ukraine, it has not really had the desired outcome. And getting back to the point which I made, that if you want peace, prepare for war. There is the war started in 22, not in 21, 22. There is a World Bank report of May 23, of 1 year after the war, which said that the cost of reconstruction of just the first year of the war is $411 billion.
My goodness.
Now, second year you can add that much, third year you can add that much. Even if a fraction of that had been spent on war preparedness, perhaps the war itself could have been averted. So that is the But those are some of the lessons that, and we will not go into the tactical lessons because they're all shrouded in the fog of war and so much information warfare as to what is doing well and what is not doing well. So that we will come to know only when the dust settles down.
Right. Moving on to the Gaza conflict, it highlights the complexity of combating terrorist organizations within civilian populations in a war. It prompts reflection on India's approach to dealing with such groups across policy, military, and tactical dimensions. Does this conflict offer any lessons for India in terms of dealing with terror organizations?
Well, what is happening in the Gaza Strip between Israel and the Hamas. Hamas, of course, supported by other countries, mainly Iran, and the kind of terrorism which we have in India, which is proxy war supported by Pakistan, are quite different. But the bottom line is that acts of terror and terrorism are unacceptable. Warfare also has some rules. You cannot be targeting innocent civilians, women, children, one combatant against another combatant is in the rules of warfare. But you cannot start slaughtering civilians. So to that extent, uh, as I said, uh, this kind of terrorism and barbarism, taking women and children hostage, that is not civilized behavior, if I can put it that way. But as far as our counter-terrorism operations are concerned, we have always done it keeping in mind that it is our people in our territory who have been misled and misguided by their handlers abroad. They are our citizens, and therefore, we, as far as possible, try to deal with them in a humane manner, even when operations are carried out and the terrorists are cornered and holed up in a house. We try our best to get them to first surrender. It gives us no joy in killing young men. After all, they are somebody's brother, father, sister, not sister, sister, It gives us no joy in that. So therefore, our approach has always been a humane approach with the use of minimum force. In our counterterrorism operations, we have never used artillery, we have never used helicopter gunships, we have never used armor. So what is happening in Hamas is more like a full-fledged conventional war and not merely counter-terrorist operations. Unlike in J&K, where it is predominantly, or why predominantly, it is all just more, is all infantry operations by small teams targeted at specific uh, int-based operations, specific terrorist groups or persons who are trying to indulge in terrorist acts, with the aim that there should be least amount of disturbance or inconvenience to the local population. So there are totally different strategies at play.